Welcome to the Ed Show, live from Washington, D.C. tonight. The president has just delivered his third State of the Union address. I was in the room for the speech. We are live for the next hour to analyze all of it. This is the Ed Show. Let's get to work.
With anyone in this chamber to build on this momentum. But I intend to fight obstruction with action, and I will oppose any effort to return to the very same policies that brought on this economic crisis in the first place.
President Obama drew a hard line in the sand tonight. He defined the final year of his first term by saying that he will fight the Republicans who plan to stop his agenda. I spoke with Democrats in Washington today who were charged up about tonight's speech. They wanted the president to speak about income inequality. He did that tonight. President Obama hit the issue really hard.
You can either settle for a country where a shrinking number of people do really well, while a growing number of Americans barely get by. Or we can restore an economy where everyone gets a fair shot and everyone does their fair share and everyone plays by the same set of rules.
That moment tonight in the speech was probably one of the biggest applause that the president got. I've been to a number of these speeches, and I've been there when there have been absolutely thunderous applause for both President Bush when he was saying that there were going to be tax cuts, and also for President Obama when he's talked about the future. I've actually felt the building shake at times. It just reverberates through the chamber. But tonight, it was a little bit different. The president came out tonight and basically laid out a roadmap for the future. What was disheartening to me as an American citizen is that there were politicians who sat on their hands tonight and gave no response when the president was talking about industries that were actually saved, like the automobile industry. Maybe because they didn't have a part of it, they weren't willing to share in the glory of jobs being saved and jobs being added, 22 months of private sector jobs added to our economy. At one point of the speech, I thought there was no news out there that the Republicans were actually going to say, okay, we're headed in the right direction. But I thought tonight one of the most powerful moments, and Lawrence mentioned it a moment ago, to be in the room and to feel the president call for teamwork, using the raid on bin Laden and the flag in his office with the signatures of the SEALs, I thought was a very powerful moment. It was very important, but most of all, I think the country needed that tonight. We have seen a record number of filibusters. We have seen this town unable to come to some conclusion on big issues because of the political divide in the country. And tonight, the president took arguably the biggest story in the world in the last year and talked about the people who were involved in the mission and talked about their sacrifice. They didn't care if they were Republican or Democrat. They didn't care about ideology. They cared about not I, but we and team. And I think the Congress needed to hear that tonight. And the president called out the Congress tonight on a number of different occasions, saying that you're pretty much out of step with the rest of the country. They agree on things across America. You guys can't agree on anything, as I paraphrase. But that's the feeling that was in the room. And then the way the president ended it, I thought was absolutely outstanding. We need some team effort to move this economy forward and get millions of people back to work in this country. And I thought he really hit it out of the park in a very powerful message, because all of us as Americans can relate. We can relate to the success of that mission. And fighting terrorism is an American thing. It's all about freedom and liberty. Everybody should get behind that. And basically tonight, the president was saying, why can't we do that? Why do we let political divide get in the way? We know how good we are as a country, and we know how good we are as a people. This is the moment that I thought the president was so strong tonight.
Which brings me back to where I began. Those of us who've been sent here to serve can learn a thing or two from the service of our troops. When you put on that uniform, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, Asian, Latino, Native American, conservative, liberal, rich, poor, gay, straight. When you're marching into battle, you look out for the person next to you, where the mission fails, where you're in the thick of the fight, You rise or fall as one unit, serving one nation, leaving no one behind.
The president tonight talking directly to the congressional members about coming together, using that raid on bin Laden to get it done. And he talked about uniform. When you put that uniform on, I took that when these congressional members put that pin on. They have an obligation to represent their constituents and not an ideology. I think that's what the message the president was sending tonight. It's a very powerful moment. Let's turn now to MSNBC. My colleagues, so great to work with all of them. Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show. Reverend Al Sharpton with us tonight, host of Politics Nation. And Chris Matthews, host of Hardball. Chris, the emotion tonight inside the rotunda was not as great as it was in other speeches, but the ending was very, very powerful. What did you take? And the president, of course, covered a lot of ground tonight. What were some of the themes that really hit you tonight?
Well, there was so many points to this speech. I think you're right about the optimism and the call to duty and the patriotic cooperation and on a common mission. I thought all of that was part of, if you will, the confection of the speech, the structure of it. But there were very interesting shots in it, I thought. One of them was this thing that came out of nowhere to me, having worked up there for all those years and covered it. Insider trading by members of Congress. I mean, they must have, the wind must have come out of them when they heard that. Here's an attack. It's an attack institutionally against them, that there is some sort of insider trading going on up there where they're benefiting from their knowledge of what's going on in committee work and going off and investing quickly in some sort of day trading or whatever on stocks. I have never heard any reference to it before in my life. Anything could go on as far as I know, but to make that kind of direct shot on national television with this huge audience suggesting he knows where they live, as I said before tonight, he's got something on him he's about to use against them. I thought it was basically a preparation for a Harry Truman-style campaign this fall. He's going to run against Congress as an institution, not just the filibuster, not just the foot dragging and the scorched earth, but the institution itself, its morality. I mean, insider trading. That was tough stuff. And I wonder what he's up to, if he's got something that he's going to work on here. But I'll tell you, the members of Congress and their wives, their spouses must have heard that. And tonight when they go home, they must be saying, what's this the president's talking about? Insider trading on Capitol Hill. Do you know something about it, dear?
Chris,
I think it was a wild statement. I want to know what's behind it.
Rachel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
That did kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, it was interesting because where that came in the speech was when the president talked about the corrupting influence of money in politics. Yeah. And, of course, we all look immediately to the Supreme Court justices to say, is this going to be the second annual response on Citizens United? But instead he went to that insider trading piece. Now, that comes out of an investigative piece on 60 Minutes not that long ago, a few weeks ago, that made some really steaming allegations against members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, saying that they were essentially benefiting in private financial terms from things that they would only know because they were members of Congress. And the immediate response to that 60 Minutes piece was that there was bipartisan legislation that they would crack down on this problem. And sort of in the heat of that 60 Minutes piece, it was all of a sudden going to move very fast, and then it's petered out and it's died. But it is something on which there is supposedly bipartisan interest and bipartisan embarrassment for ethics reform. So I do think the president's calling them out, but it's another one of those things where it's a sort of perceived common sense reform to restore faith in government. Republicans and Democrats don't substantively disagree. There's no reason Congress shouldn't work well enough to get that passed.
He also talked about bundlers and others in terms of setting a whole new standard. I think that the powerful parts of the speech, clearly there was, I think Rachel said during the speech coverage that he channeled some Reagan, and then Karen said he was Kennedy-esque, I would guess Chris would say in some parts. But I also think he was Obama-like. When he got into these people that are fighting in the military, were not looking at their color or their party. That was Obama 2004. That's the Obama America met, that was calling for people to grow beyond their differences and be on a common mission. And I think that the more he is Obama-like, the better he is, the more potent he is politically.
We knew going into this speech that the president was going to hit the job issue. He was also doing it with the backdrop of a lot of conversation about taxes in this country and a conversation about income inequality. Here's the president talking about income inequality.
Now, you can call this class warfare all you want, but asking a billionaire to pay at least as much as his secretary in taxes? Most Americans would call that common sense. When Americans talk about folks like me paying my fair share of taxes, it's not because they envy the rich. It's because they understand that when I get a tax break I don't need and the country can't afford, it either adds to the deficit or somebody else has to make up the difference, like a senior on a fixed income.
I'll tell you what, where the Republicans were sitting, you could have heard a pin drop on that one. Chris Matthews, is the president disarming the class warfare attack that he seems to be getting a lot?
Well, I thought he was watching our TV ads on MSNBC. You know, Common Sense is our punchline. The Spike Lee ads were all done. I thought this was, he says he doesn't watch TV. Well, somehow, through some symbiosis, he's talking like our ads, you know. So
well, he talked about Rachel's ad. He talked about Rachel's ad in the Hoover Dam.
Baby. Hoover Dam. It's all about the Hoover Dam.
And I saw some blueberry pie around John Boehner's house.
Maybe Spike is sending the scripts over. I don't know, but he seemed to know the wording. Jeez.
I got to tell all of you before we leave here, I ran into a gentleman tonight. He grabbed my arm. He said, Ed, how are you? I said, great, sir. He says, I'm Jon Favreau's dad.
Oh, wow.
Jon Favreau, of course, is a speechwriter. He says, this is the first time I've been able to be up in the gallery. He says, what did you think? I said, wait a minute. I want to know what you thought. He said, my son hasn't slept for a month. He's been up every night doing this for the last month. It's a speech that they really had to get right. And when you go back after hearing that, a dad talk about his son as a speechwriter, seeing what the president did tonight, he covered a lot of ground. He gave labor, I thought, a good word. He talked about manufacturing. Chris, let me ask you, there's more manufacturing in this speech than what we've seen in more than a decade, wouldn't you think?
Oh, he's listening to you, too, I think, and all of us about the need to bring back job opportunities for kids coming out of high school. By the way, that Jon Favreau, when I gave my honorary speech at my commencement at my college, Holy Cross, he was the young kid who was graduating who gave a hell of a speech. That was Jon Favreau. I'm so proud of that guy, how far he's come. I think manufacturing is it. And I talk about the old neighborhoods I grew up in the city, row houses. I drove by them the other day. They're all tumbling apart. The kids, a lot of them African-American kids, don't have the job opportunities when they turn 18 that our parents and grandparents did. Same neighborhoods, no jobs.
Got to run. Rachel, Al, Chris, thanks so much for joining me tonight on this late edition of the Ed Show. I appreciate it so much. Share your thoughts on Twitter at Ed Show. We want to know what you think. What'd you think of tonight's speech? Coming up, Senator Bernie Sanders and a school teacher from Pennsylvania named Sarah Ferguson. She was on our show last week to talk about her governor's radical plan to defund her public school. Tonight, she was sitting with the First Lady. Stay tuned. You're watching the Ed Show on MSNBC.